Hi everyone, welcome. Out here on the bench, I've got my African night crawlers, abbreviated as ANC, here on this information board. And these little guys were last fed 12 days ago, and 12 days ago we introduced a new test object into here. It's something we've done before, which is the composting of cotton, and it's been bits of similar terry cloth towel is what you see down here that we've done that with in the past. We've also taken some of my old socks, but every time I've done this, I've always created much smaller chunks of material. Even one sock was seemingly too big, so I chopped it in half, so it was like half a sock, half a sock. Here too, these chunks of towel in the past had been probably cut to a size no bigger than perhaps a quarter of what we have here now today. But really quick, before we get into it, let's just cover the rest of the bits of info here. It's not a very big population according to our estimates. When we release the worms into here using everyone's guesstimates, we've averaged a number close to 750, and the system was fed 7 times so far. And today I'm coming in with feeding number 8. It's just an assortment of fruits and veggies out of the freezer, kind of thawing already. And what else do we have here? I think we might have mentioned how it's been 12 days since the last check-in, so that pretty much covers all the bases. I've got something here also in terms of food item, similar to my worm chow, but it's breadcrumbs, very old breadcrumbs that are smelling a little bit funky. So, alright, enough of the intro and explanation. This plastic had been on here up until the last check-in, and we removed it. And I think one of my to-do items from the last check-in was to actually put it back, which I, in the end, never did. I don't know. A lot of times when I'm assigned homework, I give myself things to do after we conclude our videos here, things that I sometimes brand as homework. I don't always do. But you know, having that plastic around, even if we don't return to using it as a top covering, and maybe sticking to what we had here, which was just a single sheet of cardboard, I don't know, it seems like it did pretty good. I could see some of the moisture that was wicking up through this towel. And I don't know, a lot of times, I mean, if you got just plain old, plain old plastic there, the recirculation of moisture is very clear and obvious. I think with something like that cardboard, we probably do have a good bit of moisture recirculating back into the system, but I would also assume a good bit of it also is allowed to escape through evaporation. You know, I sort of just skimmed through the last video, so I don't have a clear recollection of exactly how things were done last time, but this feeding zone indicator is one of the things we often leave behind for ourselves as a clue as to what was done here last time as far as the last feeding goes, 12 days ago. The feeding zone indicator was showing that we fed down the middle, and I did breeze through the video quickly enough to be able to glimpse at what was fed, and it was all similar stuff to what they're getting today, just small food scraps, little bits of vegetable matter that had been frozen. And this was a whole either lemon or lime, and I couldn't remember which it was at this point. I think even when it was put in here, it had this unusual color that prevented it from being identified as one or the other. You know what? I've just opened it up, and perhaps the reason we couldn't classify it as a lemon or a lime is because it's neither. It's a tangerine. Oh, brother. I am certainly no food identification expert, that's for sure. Alright, so we're just going to kind of come through here like a big till and unearth what was put in here as the last feeding, and it's going to be a combination of old food scraps and bedding for the most part, and possibly a few worms helping with the breakdown of that stuff. The other thing helping a lot with the breakdown of stuff in these systems is all those little tiny white spots you see everywhere, the springtails. So this, I think, was like a whole banana. The peel of a banana always takes a whole lot longer than the soft inner portion of it. These are all just chunks of newspaper and other miscellaneous bedding type objects. I'm just wondering if perhaps I could even till the surrounding materials a little bit better as long as I'm coming through here like a plow. We're already about halfway through, and I just sort of loosened up some of the material that we already excavated around the feeding zone. So this unearths almost the remainder of the stuff. Oh, what do we have here? Perhaps another orange that I also last week was unable to classify properly. More bedding. There's all kinds of stuff left over down here in this feeding zone, obviously. So even coming in today might be unnecessary because there's plenty of stuff that's readily available as food and the moisture seems good, but you know, it's a rare occasion that I back away from one of my planned feedings, especially when I've already come down here with the food. Perhaps if it was one of those situations where I wait to see how the system is doing before I shoot upstairs to selectively choose what's going to be fed. More recently, I've just been sort of coming down here with the expectation that the food is going to get placed into one or more worm bins, and that's going to be the end of the deal. And very rarely do I pull away from what's been planned that way. So I'm just sort of getting this feeling like I need to be generous with bedding, and for that reason I wanted to make a good bit of space down in the feeding zone so that we can fit the fresh bedding and food, the old foods and bedding, and then also have enough material in the end to get everything neatly covered up. So I don't know, we did talk about how to incorporate this towel into future feedings in such a way that it would maximize its exposure to worm traffic. But there was something about the way the system looked when I opened it up and was greeted by this nice colorful towel. Guess what? We're not going to follow through on the old idea, but we do have other top cover material that would be really useful as bedding down here. We can grab some of this stuff that was clearly used as top covering up until the towel came in on the scene. So let's put this stuff to some good use. And the other thing I wanted to use was what I've got here, is my collection of leaves from the garden. The other thing I do sometimes with this stuff, besides using it as sort of foundational bedding in my feeding zones, I'll sometimes take this stuff and I'll sprinkle it out as sort of a top coating, a top dressing, almost like a mulch layer, if you will. And I think we've got enough in that box to do that today. That'll be kind of a nice, possibly a nice way to cap off today's check-in. So we got all kinds of yummy stuff, and this is when I feel a little bit bad for a few of the worms that are kind of caught up in some of these foods, who might be getting placed in on top of a pile of frozen food stuff. Well, let's hope we're not inconveniencing them too greatly, because that's their feeding, and it, as anticipated, took up a good amount of space there. But we're not done yet. I'm gonna come in here a little bit before I forget, because I've got my BTI mosquito dunks solution in here, and while we did excavate pretty thoroughly down the middle to make room for today's feeding, some of this material out here on the edges is still relatively undisturbed. And if there are any flying insect activities going on, none of which I observed today, so I don't think there's real reason for concern, but it's more of a preventative measure. Perhaps at the end too we'll cover up there as well. But let's treat them to a little bit more bedding down the feeding zone. But before we backfill, let's not forget I've got crushed eggshell that I use as grit in my feedings, and then there's this stuff, breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs, any sort of bread to me it seems like is typically going to result in a good bit of moldy growth. That's kind of what I expect to see here. Dry leaves, I think there's going to be a certain amount of trade-off here, because the dry leaves will get some moisture from the frozen veggies. As they thaw, they'll kick out little bits of their moisture content. Now if we had plastic coverings here, then that moisture would definitely stay locked in and recirculate. So I'm wondering if the plastic bubble wrap should come back. So before we make that decision, I guess let's factor in the condition of the material out here on the edges. Perhaps the state that it's in will help us decide. And you know, it's pretty damp stuff. We're under 100 days of age, and this is the point where I'm always feeling compelled to get the material in the systems to be less clumpy, you know, more free-flowing. But then I have to remind myself, hey, this system's not even 100 days old yet. It's got a long ways to go before you would want to consider harvesting its castings, or does it? I don't know. I started out, I guess, like most worm farmers, a little bit impatient, unwilling to go hundreds and hundreds of days to get that first harvest of my first batch of worms, the castings that they created. So my harvests came early, back in the early days, but nowadays it's just more about, I think, capacity in the system for the most part. There's a certain capacity that I like to work to, where I feel comfortable having a certain amount of material in the bin, but also just free space to work, and leave my options open for different things I could do with that available space that I leave in reserve. So let's see. Moisture, yeah. A lot of times stuff sticking to my glove is the sign of moisture, but we're gonna roll with it. I think I like it. Let's get the feeding zone indicator back in here. Top coverings, I think we're okay. It's been getting more and more humid, so I think we're gonna stick to returning things the way we found it. And for anybody who was kind of psyched up about seeing this piece of fabric get submerged down into the material today, well, I don't know. Sorry. Apologies for the crushed expectations. Hopefully nobody's in that camp and nobody was looking too forward to it, but hopefully more of you are out there that agree that it's kind of a cool looking intro. When you come in, there's a splash of color, definitely sets it apart from the rest of the systems. So I think I'm going to stick to it. And the last piece to come back on is just this piece of plastic, which I think was useful to have it sort of dedicated to the system, sort of a drop cloth to put things onto while we're working and feeding, and keep it from making a big mess. But it's also nice to know that if we feel like things start getting dry, we want to retain the moisture, we can just kick that into action. So that's pretty much it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now. Oops, almost forgot. We wanted to add some leaves, didn't we? Guess what? It's going to be sprinkled on top of the feeding zone indicator this time, just for a change of pace. Just because we wanted to get some leaves in there for them to play around in. And I forgot, which is not too unusual. But we could always squeeze a little bit more in, right? All right, everyone. Thanks again for watching.